This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and it's our special privilege and treat today to have two of our staff members who are with us to share some perspective because, as they were telling me before we came in the studio, they view themselves as being in the second half of life, playing in the second half with, although they didn't say so, some perspective that I appreciate. Will, I think you actually characterized it not as the second half, but as the
fourth quarter.
Fourth quarter. Well, sometimes those fourth quarters can be pretty long. It is fair to say, I think for our listeners' benefit anyway, that we do have some gray hair in the studio this evening.
At least we have hair.
Yes.
Our guests today are Mr. Pete Saunders and Mr. Will Robinson. Thank you for being with us, gentlemen.
Thank you
for having us.
If we could, let's start, speaking of perspective, by just saying a couple of words from each of you about folks that have made a difference in your life from a perspective standpoint, mentors or parents. Pete, anyone in particular come to mind?
Yeah, when I got started in radio, I was in the 10th grade down in Broadway. And, of course, Jerry Farmer was the number one DJ in this whole area, all over North Carolina. He was known, really. He did a lot of special events and all. He had a 57 convertible Ford, white with a black top, and I wanted to be just like him because the schools back then, we had 4 schools, and they had a program on the school in the afternoon from 3 to 4 that they would have one school up each afternoon, and we could play DJ, and we could take requests from our friends and all. So that's how I got into radio, and that's how I met Jerry Farmer, and he taught me a lot in it.
And it's become a lifetime passion and career for you.
That was 56 years ago.
Oh, okay. But who's counting?
Who's counting? That's right.
Will, how about you?
Well, I've been blessed to have so many great mentors in my life. Of course, my parents and teachers and coaches and people along the way during my professional careers who've always been there and given me great advice. So I've just been really blessed in that area. As
our listeners know, our guests choose the music, and for our first song, we've got one that Pete has identified. Ray Peterson's Tell Laura I Love Her. What is it that's special about that song for you?
Well, as I say, I've been in radio for 50-some years, and back in the 80s, I met a guy named Phil Welch. Phil was a former military man, and he happened to know a couple of people in New York, like Dick Clark and like Phil Spector. So he wanted to put on a POWMIA celebrity golf and concert event here in this area. And so he got in touch with me. He knew I was with radio, and so we started working on it. And I got to know a lot of these one-hit wonders, we called them, in the years gone by. And so that first year we did the promotion, we did the event, we raised a lot of money. And, of course, all the proceeds went. All the entertainers came at no charge. They just put them up in a hotel and so forth and fed them. And so then I met Ray Peterson, and he's the guy that I used to listen to the song all the time, Tell Laura I Love Her. And, of course, it's a great song. It's about a love affair. And so...
Well, it's a pretty sad song,
right,
actually.
Right. Well, life is like that sometimes. But anyhow, I got to know Ray, and each year he came for about the whole 5 years. And what happened, we got to meet him and his wife, my wife and I, and every time he'd come near, he would come by and see us. And he even came on a Bible study one Monday night, he and his wife. And so we just had a great relationship. Of course, the main thing about him, what impressed me was that he had polio when he was a child. He was never supposed to walk or do anything, but he really did everything. He played golf, he was a great entertainer, and he did some great music.
Let's hear the song, Tell Laura I Love Her, by Ray Peterson.
Laura and Tommy were lovers. He wanted to give her everything. Tell Laura I love her. Tell Laura I love her.
That was Tell Laura I Love Her by Ray Peterson. Our guests today are Pete Saunders and Will Robinson. And Will, if we could come back to you. Will wears a couple of different hats here at the station, and one of them is our programming manager. So Will knows something about music. Tell us, Will, a little bit about why it is that music is significant in your life, or what you view as the significance of music.
Well, I was introduced to music by my sister, Janie, and I can remember as a little boy, she would drag me in front of the television and we'd watch Dick Clark from Philadelphia, PA, and we'd watch American Bandstand. And from that, I got a transistor radio, and to me, that just opened up a world that was unknown to me, that living in rural North Carolina, to be able to have a little radio, and at night you can get WABC New York or WBZ Boston or KDKA in Cincinnati. It was just amazing to me that I could hear music from all those faraway places. And ever since that, I've always had this just love of music, and particularly understanding the lyrics of the music to me, which was really important, because we obviously saw a lot of these artists on television, but many of them didn't write their own music. We had great writers, people like Neil Sedaka, people like Carole King, who before her music career as a performer, she was actually a great songwriter up in the Brill Building in New York. So there were all these great songwriters and these young singers who just really transformed America as they began putting out rock and roll music. And so since the late 50s, early 60s, that has been a passion of mine.
I want to come back to that, pick up on your comment about lyrics here in a minute, but let me ask you first, Pete, about the significance of music in your life.
Well, again, it's meant a lot to me. That's all I've known.
You haven't been involved with a news talk station then. It's been music stations all along.
As a matter of fact, I was in Winston-Salem one time. NBC, NIS, decided to go with an all-news format for radio. And they bought, I don't know how many radio stations on the East Coast. They bought one of Stu Epperson stations in Winston-Salem. And so it lasted about probably 6 months. And they decided, well, even though there was a good population in Winston-Salem, that all news and information station was not going to go back then. That was in the late 70s when that happened.
But music is what they went back to, and,
right.
And that's been the focus of your career.
Every station, and I've only been like 4 or 5 stations on my whole life, and of course, most of it, where it's been here quite a while now, but the one thing that has always impressed me, too, is the thing that you guys came up with here, the Timeless Favorites. What a great, great slogan for our music. It's just fantastic. It just says the whole thing.
Well, speaking of timeless favorites, Will, let me come back to you on your comment about lyrics. When you're making decisions about the playlist for Life 103.1, lyrics are something that you pay close attention to. Why is that?
I think that it's important when we're talking about timeless favorites. There are some songs that have existed for years that don't really have quality lyrics, but I think the ones that we're going to remember, the ones we're going to be thinking about 20 years from now, are the ones that still have good lyrics. And there's just something magical about the poetry that's involved in a song. We're going to talk about a couple later on that I believe just have really strong lyrics that send a message, and it helps us remember what's important in life.
Well, tell you what, let's go to that now. You've identified a song by Van Morrison. Tell us about it.
Well, that's a song that's a pretty recent add to our playlist. Sir George Ivan Morrison. He's from Northern Ireland, and of course he was not recently knighted, but has been knighted, but we all know him, of course, as Van Morrison. And most people who think about Van Morrison, they think about Brown Eyed Girl, which is just a great song. But this particular song, Bright Side of the Road, to me is just joyful, it's uplifting, and once again, it gives us a message. It tells us about life. In the lyrics, he says, "Into this life we're born, baby, sometimes we don't know why, and time seems to go by so fast in the twinkling of an eye." It just helps us remember that life is temporary and it's brief, and we should not be spending time on the dark side of the street, but we in fact should be spending our time on the bright side of the road.
One of the lines in that song that struck me too is the one where he says, "Help me sing my song," which suggests that this life is a collaborative endeavor.
And also talking about help me share my load. So it's not something that we want to go through life alone. We want to go through with our friends, with our loved ones, and with good music.
Let's hear the song, Bright Side of the Road by Van Morrison. That was Bright Side of the Road by Van Morrison. Pete, if we could, I'd like to come back to you for a minute to have you say something about another song that you've identified as special to you. Traces by the Classics 4. Tell us about that.
Traces of Love. That was one of the best songs, too. As I say, I heard it back in the 50s and 60s. But then I got to meet the guy when we started doing those concerts and all. Heck of a nice guy.
Meet the guy. What guy? Dennis Yost?
Dennis Yost.
The lead singer in the band.
Lead singer. It was Dennis Yost and the Classics 4 to start with. But he became, known as a soloist, too, I'm pretty sure. But anyhow, he had some songs that was great, too. And, I was just showing Will that one of the verses in there, Traces of Love, really touches home. It says, ribbons from her hair, souvenirs of days together, the rings she used to wear, pages from an old love letter, traces of love long ago that didn't work out right, traces of love with me tonight. Man, them were some great lyrics, aren't they?
Well, talk about melancholy. Pete, you've identified a couple of songs here that say something about the challenges of life.
Well, hey, that first love don't always work out,
Uh-huh. You speak from experience.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But anyhow, the lady I finally got, I met her actually when I was 16 years old. And she wrote in her diary, because later on when we got married in 1978.
You're talking about your good wife, Dottie.
Dottie, when we got to Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 1978, she says, I found my old diary and it says on such and such date, didn't do much this weekend. On Sunday, my cousin and I went over to Cousin Floyd's house and I met Pete S. So she was 16 years old, and I was like 19 at that time.
Uh-huh.
And so we ended up getting married in 1978. But she's a great lady, I'm here to tell you, one of the best.
And here you are, these many years later.
Yes.
Will, broadening the theme here for a minute, what do you see as the role of memories and the advantages or disadvantages of looking back on things? Maybe you can speak to that from your own experience.
Well, I think that just thinking about our station, what we play really with our music is a lot of nostalgia that takes us back to a different place in time. And in most instances, I think it's a positive thing that most of the time we think about our earlier days with a lot of positive thoughts. But
and isn't it true that we often get comments from listeners about particular songs saying, I know exactly where I was when I first heard that song, or it takes me to this particular event in my life.
Right. And one of the hardest things, particularly if you have a format like a top 40 station, introducing new songs, people don't want to hear songs they haven't heard. They want to hear music with which they're familiar. And, of course, we don't have that problem because most of our songs I think people are already familiar with. But it's always also fun just occasionally to put in a song that maybe wasn't widely played, and it introduces people maybe to an artist they know, but some music that they haven't heard yet. So that's always exciting. But I do think that the music is something that connects us with the past, that it connects us with that moment or that girl or that boy that we shared that moment with. And even my wife Gloria and I now, we have songs that we think about that when we were played at our wedding or something that now I think of one song particularly that I remember as a part of a little wedding CD that someone created for us, and we always think about that kind of as being a special song for us.
Well, let's hear the song, Pete, that you've identified, Traces by the Classics 4. That was Traces by the Classics 4. If you're just joining us, our guests here on Grace Notes this evening are Will Robinson, who, among other things, is our programming manager here at Life 103.1, and Pete Saunders, one of our marketing consultants. One of the things I know I don't say often enough, but that I appreciate about both of you is how you treat others. And not to put you on the spot too much, but I'd be interested in having you tell us a little something about why it is you treat others as well as you do. Pete, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I learned quite a while back, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And of course, some people change around and says, but do it first, And I've always tried to treat people the right way. Never been in a lot of trouble all my life. I can remember my dad listening to Billy Graham on the radio years ago when I was just a little boy, of course.
A timely name.
Right. But anyhow, my dad, I lost him he was only 40 years old. He had heart trouble. So anyhow, my mother raised me then, and she always had a sign in her kitchen that said, no cussing, no fussing, no drinking. And my mother just felt that way. And so we would always have Sunday dinners. Everybody was welcome. She would bring in people off the streets. I even found a little girl one time. She was like 6 years old, but she had spent the night in the woods and had pine rosin in her hair. I took her home and found a pair of shoes that would fit her and everything. And the church was having a Christmas party, and we took her down there, and ended up we called the shelter people, and they finally found a home for the little girl. Didn't let her mother have her back. But I've just always had a soft heart,
It sounds like your mom especially had some real influence on you.
Yes.
In that way.
She sure did.
Will, how about you?
Well, I think it's always, we are a reflection of our parents to a large extent. And of course, my parents were very caring and treated us with respect and love, and never felt for one moment that my sister and I were not loved. And, I think that simply sets up a life script for us that we follow. And I certainly recognize through my experience working in public schools and working in nonprofits that everyone has value. And what I think our job as human beings is to see the value in every person. And when we do that, then treating them well is not so hard after all.
Well, speaking of parents and things gone by, you've identified a song for us that has something to do with that, again, from a perspective standpoint. Tell us about it. End of the Line by the Traveling Wilburys.
Well, of course, the Traveling Wilburys, to me, was a true supergroup just because of the makeup of the group. It consisted of George Harrison, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, whose maybe a name is not as familiar, but he was with ELO, the Electric Light Orchestra, Roy Orbison, and Bob Dylan. And they got together and created an album, just some wonderful music. And one of the songs, of course, is End of the Line, and it has kind of the sound, the rhythm of it is sort of like you're on a train and you're heading to the end of the line. And of course, as you mentioned, we all do have a little gray hair here, is that we are heading to the end of the line. Of course, we're all doing that to a certain extent, but maybe we're a little farther along down the track than other people. But to me, it talks about the importance of things that are really important to us as we're traveling down that road. And for me, particularly, there's a verse there that says, it's all right, even if you're old and gray, well, it's all right, you've still got something to say. And I think that's important for people, particularly as they reach retirement age, that somehow they think they could just go home and they can watch television or play golf. But you have tremendous bank of life experiences that you have that you could share with other people. And one of the things that really, I guess, irritates me is that when I find somebody who has so much talent and then they just leave it, they don't share it with people. And of course, I was really into mentoring, and I believe that's something that we all are required to do as members of the human race, that we need to pass on experiences and life lessons to others, and particularly you young people, because there are a lot of young people in the world who just don't have that rock. They don't have that person that they know they can count on for good information or advice, or to just be someone to listen. And that's really what I would hate to see, is that anyone, towards the end of their life, they don't take the opportunity to share what they have with others. Mm-hmm.
Gentlemen, thank you both for being here this evening. It's been, as I said at the outset, a real treat to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Alan.
Let's hear the song by the Traveling Wilburys, End of the Line. You've been listening to Grace Notes, a special program here on Life 103.1 featuring people who may be relatively unknown, but who meet life's challenges in ways that brighten the lives of those around them. Our producer is Christina Dolan. I'm Alan Button, and we invite you to join all of us here at the station again next Friday at 5:30 for Grace Notes on Life 103.1.